Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her fingers resting lightly on Adam's phone, as if the mere touch of it might bring everything crumbling down. The house around her was quiet, the warmth of the evening sun barely reaching her as shadows stretched long across the floor. It had been days since she first saw Lydia's name on his phone screen, and every moment since it felt like walking on glass. She didn't dare look again at the messages she'd read, sweet words exchanged in a language once theirs. Sarah had replayed those messages in her mind 1,000 times, each time feeling more hollow than the last. Who was Lydia? How had Adam found someone new when she thought their bond was unbreakable? Adam had always been open with her, his phone left on counters and nightstands, a symbol of the trust they'd built. But recently, everything changed. He became more guarded, more distant, even secretive. His late nights at the office grew more frequent, his stories about work shorter, more rehearsed. And then there was Lydia. The past week had been suffocating. She watched Adam closely, hoping to catch a sign that it was all just a misunderstanding. Maybe Lydia was a colleague, maybe those messages had an innocent explanation. But hope dwindled each time he avoided her gaze or found an excuse to leave the house. Tonight, Sarah sat waiting. Adam had promised to be home for dinner, yet the clock ticked past 7, then 8. She hadn't touched the meal she prepared, her appetite long lost to the pit in her stomach. The longer she sat alone, the more her mind wandered to places she didn't want to go. She wanted to confront him, to ask outright who Lydia was. But the fear of his answer froze her in place. What if he admitted the worst? A noise at the door startled her. She quickly put the phone back on the counter and stood, smoothing her shirt as if preparing for battle. Adam walked in, looking tired, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder. He didn't notice the untouched meal, nor the tension in the air as he crossed the room to kiss her on the cheek. "Hey, sorry I'm late," he muttered, heading for the fridge. "Work's been crazy." Sarah watched him in silence, her heart racing. It was now or never. "Adam," she began, her voice unsteady. He turned, a beer in hand, eyebrows raised. "I found some messages on your phone," she continued, her throat tightening. "From someone named Lydia." His face didn't change, no flinch, no guilt. He set the beer down on the counter and met her eyes. "Lydia's just a friend, Sarah. A colleague. We've been working on a big case together," he said calmly, too calmly. Sarah swallowed hard, unsure if she should believe him. His words sounded rehearsed, too perfect. "A friend," she echoed, trying to keep her voice steady. "Then why were there romantic texts?" Adam's expression shifted, just for a second, before he quickly masked it with a tired sigh. "It's nothing serious. We've just gotten a little close lately, that's all. But it doesn't mean anything." Sarah's heart sank. The truth was finally out, but it wasn't any less painful. She turned away, her vision blurring with tears. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask why he had betrayed everything they'd built together. But her voice failed her. "Sarah," Adam's voice softened as he stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. "I love you. I don't want to hurt you." She pulled away, her hands trembling. "You already have." For the first time in weeks, Adam looked genuinely upset. He tried to explain, to tell her how the pressures at work, the long hours, and the stress had led him to seek comfort in someone else. But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. Her world had shattered, and no amount of excuses could put the pieces back together. She turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Adam standing in the dim light. As she made her way up the stairs to their bedroom, she realized that the trust they had shared was gone, and she wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. Upstairs, she sat on the edge of their bed, staring at the photo on the nightstand, a picture of them on their wedding day, smiling, happy, in love. How had they gotten here? How had everything fallen apart so quietly, so suddenly? But the truth was, it hadn't happened suddenly. The cracks had been forming for months, maybe even years. She had just been too blind to see them. That evening, the air in their house felt heavier than usual. Sarah could feel the weight of her emotions pressing down on her chest as she heard Adam's car pull into the driveway. Every second that passed since the front door opened seemed like a countdown to the inevitable. She had waited long enough. Tonight, she would get the truth. Adam walked into the kitchen, his tie loosened and eyes dull with exhaustion. He gave her a weak smile as he set his briefcase down, but Sarah didn't return it. Her throat was tight, her pulse quickened as her eyes followed him. "Adam," she said softly, trying to steady herself. Her voice trembled despite her best efforts. "We need to talk." He stopped, his back to her for a moment longer than necessary before turning around. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, like he had known this confrontation was coming. Slowly, he pulled out a chair and sat across from her, resting his hands on the table between them. His silence was suffocating. "I know about Lydia," Sarah said, the words hanging in the air, heavy and undeniable. For a brief second, Adam's face betrayed him, his eyes widened ever so slightly before he dropped his gaze to the table. The air between them seemed to freeze, the walls of their home suddenly feeling too small. He didn't rush to defend himself. He didn't try to deny it. Instead, he sat there, shoulders hunched, as if weighed down by guilt. After a long, tense silence, Adam finally spoke, his voice low and full of regret. "It's true," he said, barely above a whisper. "I've been seeing Lydia." Sarah's heart stopped. Even though she had feared this moment, hoped that perhaps it was all a misunderstanding, hearing those words felt like a dagger to her chest. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she didn't know if she could keep going. She couldn't take her eyes off him. She searched his face for some sign of remorse, some explanation that might ease the sharp sting of betrayal. But Adam looked down, unable to meet her gaze, as if too ashamed of what he had done. "How long?" Sarah's voice was fragile, shaking like a leaf in the wind. She dreaded the answer, prayed it would be something she could forgive, something fleeting and insignificant. 3 months, he replied, his tone so flat, so detached, that it took her a moment to register the weight of his words. 3 months. Not days, not weeks. Months. The time stretched out in her mind, every memory she thought was safe now tainted, infected with doubt. Sarah blinked rapidly, trying to stop the tears from falling. But it was no use. She could feel them coming, hot and unrelenting, a physical manifestation of the pain swelling inside her chest. "Why?" she managed to whisper, her voice so soft it was almost drowned out by the ticking of the clock on the wall. "We were happy, Adam." "What changed?" Adam sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair and running a hand through his hair. He looked defeated, as though the weight of his actions had finally caught up to him. "I don't know," he began, his voice distant. "At first, I thought everything was fine. But after a while, I started feeling trapped. Like I wasn't living my own life anymore. You were always so perfect, Sarah. You're everything I thought I wanted, but I don't know. I needed something different." Sarah flinched as if his words were a slap across the face. Perfect? The very thing she had always strived to be for him, the loving wife, the supportive partner, was now being used against her. It felt cruel, like a mockery of all the love and care she had poured into their relationship. "You were bored," she said, her voice hollow as she fought to comprehend how the man she adored could grow restless with the life they had built together. "You wanted something different. Something exciting?" Adam didn't respond immediately. He only looked at her with the same exhausted guilt, unable to offer anything that could lessen the blow. She pushed her chair back, the scraping sound harsh against the quiet of the room. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in on her, the home they had shared, built together, now suffocating under the weight of this betrayal. Without another word, Sarah fled upstairs to their bedroom, her sanctuary. She slammed the door shut and collapsed onto the bed, her sobs finally escaping in jagged, desperate bursts. Everything, every precious memory, every dream she had nurtured for their future, shattered like glass before her. She curled up on the bed, clutching the pillow as if it could absorb her pain. How had it come to this? How could the man she had trusted with her heart, her soul, choose someone else? The betrayal was too deep, too raw. She couldn't bear the thought of facing Adam again, couldn't fathom the idea of sitting across from him, knowing that he had given pieces of himself to someone else for 3 whole months. Her tears soaked the pillow beneath her, but the ache in her heart only deepened with each passing minute. She wished she could turn back time, go back to the days when their love was strong and untainted. But no matter how much she longed for it, the past was gone. Adam had made his choice, and now, everything had changed. For the first time in their marriage, Sarah realized she was truly alone. The days after Adam's confession passed in a fog for Sarah. The once lively warmth of their home was replaced by a stifling silence that pressed down on her like an unbearable weight. Adam slept on the couch now, and each night, she lay awake in their bed, staring at the ceiling, haunted by thoughts of Lydia, of betrayal, and of the man she had once thought she knew. Their conversations were brief and stilted, filled with the necessary words of daily life. The trash needs to go out, I'll pick up groceries, but nothing more. The real conversation, the one about them, hung heavy in the air, an unspoken question neither dared to voice. Is this the end? Sarah found herself trapped in a whirlwind of emotions. She loved Adam, or at least, she loved the version of him she thought she knew. But the pain of his betrayal, the image of him with Lydia, gnawed at her soul every waking moment. Part of her wanted to walk out, to slam the door behind her and never look back. Another part, though, clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way back to each other. One evening, as the heavy silence pressed in again, Sarah realized she had to make a decision. She couldn't live in this purgatory forever, trapped between love and heartbreak. She sat alone at the kitchen table, staring into the cup of tea that had long since gone cold, weighing her choices. Her mind kept flashing back to the beginning of their relationship, the way Adam used to look at her, the laughter they shared, the dreams they had built together. Could that be saved? Or was it already too late? Sarah knew she wasn't ready to give up, not without trying everything she could. After all, love wasn't something that just faded away, not like this. Maybe they could find a way to rebuild, to piece together the fragments of their shattered trust. Maybe marriage counseling could help. The next day, after mustering the courage, she approached Adam. He was sitting on the couch, flipping absent-mindedly through his phone, a habit that had become all too frequent lately. "We need help, Adam," Sarah said quietly, her voice firm but gentle. "We can't keep living like this. I think we should try marriage counseling." Adam looked up at her, his face a mask of weariness. For a moment, Sarah thought he might refuse, that he would push her suggestion aside like so many other things they used to discuss. But after a pause, he nodded, his expression resigned. Yeah, okay," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Let's try it." They started therapy the following week. The sessions were awkward at first, filled with the raw tension that came with dredging up old wounds. Sarah poured her heart out, trying to make sense of how everything had unraveled so quickly. She asked the therapist questions that burned inside her. Why wasn't I enough? When did you stop loving me? But Adam was evasive, deflecting the questions with vague answers that left her feeling more frustrated than before. "I don't know," he'd say, his eyes darting away from hers. "It just happened." Each session felt like walking through a maze, Sarah trying desperately to find the root of their problems, only to hit another dead end of Adam's uncertainty. She explained how the Lydia situation had blindsided her, how she couldn't understand where things had gone wrong when everything had seemed perfect on the surface. But Adam's responses remained shallow, as if he was afraid to dig deeper into the truth. "I don't want to hurt you more than I already have," he said once, during a particularly tense session. "But I need answers, Adam." Sarah's voice cracked, her emotions spilling over. "I need to know what happened to us." Adam shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I'm trying, Sarah, I really am. But I don't know what you want me to say." Weeks passed, and though Sarah clung to the hope that therapy might pull them out of the wreckage, Adam's distance only seemed to grow. He became more withdrawn, his behavior erratic. Some nights, he came home even later than before, offering half-hearted excuses about work or meeting friends. His phone was still glued to him, never left out of sight, and Sarah's suspicions gnawed at her again. Was Lydia still in the picture? Or was there someone new now? It was a slow, painful erosion of trust. Every time Adam left the house, Sarah's anxiety spiked, her mind filling with worst-case scenarios. She tried to push the thoughts away, tried to focus on their therapy sessions, on the small progress they made in counseling. But Adam's growing absence, both physically and emotionally, made it harder to believe that they could ever truly heal. One night, after another late return, Sarah finally confronted him. He had walked in at nearly midnight, his shirt rumpled and his eyes glazed with exhaustion. "Where were you?" Sarah asked, standing in the hallway as he shrugged off his coat. Her voice trembled with barely contained frustration. "I've been waiting for hours." "Work," Adam replied, too quickly, too casually. He moved past her, heading for the kitchen as if the conversation was already over. "Work, again?" Sarah followed him, her fists clenched at her sides. "It's always work, Adam. But you've been gone more and more, and I don't see any effort from you to make this better." He stopped, his back still to her, and let out a long, tired sigh. "I don't know what you want from me, Sarah," he said, his voice flat. "I'm doing the best I can." "The best you can?" Sarah's voice rose, her frustration boiling over. "We're in therapy, but you're not even trying to fix this. You're barely here, and when you are, you act like you don't care." Adam turned to face her, his expression a mixture of guilt and weariness. "I don't know how to fix this, okay? I don't know if I can." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had fought so hard to keep them together, to believe that they could repair what had been broken. But standing there, in the dim light of their kitchen, she realized that Adam might have already given up long before she even knew. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "Do you even want to fix this?" she asked, her voice soft but heavy with the weight of everything she had held inside. Adam's silence answered her more clearly than any words could. One evening, after another agonizingly late night for Adam, Sarah sat in the stillness of their living room, staring blankly at the empty space where her husband should have been. The weight of suspicion had become too much to bear. Every unanswered question, every cold, detached conversation, had pushed her further into the realization that she needed to know the truth, not just for her peace of mind, but for her own survival. That night, something inside her snapped. She couldn't keep living in this limbo, drowning in doubt and uncertainty. She needed proof. The next morning, Sarah found herself sitting in a small, nondescript office, her hands clenched tightly in her lap as she explained her situation to a private investigator. It was a drastic decision, one she never imagined she would take. Yet, there she was, feeling a deep sense of resolve as the investigator nodded and took notes. A few days later, her phone rang. It was the investigator. "Mrs. Parker, I have some information for you. Could you meet me at the office?" Sarah's heart sank into her stomach. She agreed, and the hours until the meeting felt like an eternity. She knew that whatever he had found would change everything. Still, nothing could have prepared her for the weight of the truth she was about to uncover. Sitting across from the investigator, Sarah felt her body tense as he laid a small envelope on the desk between them. "I've confirmed that Adam has been seeing Lydia," the investigator said gently, his voice neutral but careful. "But there's more." Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were photos, clear as day, Adam and Lydia together. They were at a cafe, sitting close, their heads leaned in as they talked. Another picture showed them laughing, their hands touching in a way that left no room for doubt. They weren't just colleagues. They were intimately involved, just as Sarah had feared. Her heart pounded, the betrayal crashing over her in waves. But the worst was yet to come. "There's also financial activity you should be aware of," the investigator continued, sliding a report across the desk. "Adam has been funneling money from your shared accounts into Lydia's business. Significant amounts." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she scanned the papers. There it was, withdrawals and transfers, all hidden under vague descriptions, quietly siphoned from their finances into Lydia's business. Thousands of dollars. Not just once or twice, but over the course of months. The air seemed to leave the room as Sarah's world crumbled around her. It wasn't just that Adam had betrayed her emotionally. He had lied to her on every possible level, deceiving her, using their money to support another woman's business without her knowledge. It was like a second wave of betrayal, deeper, colder, more calculated. She felt numb, like she was floating outside of her own body, watching from afar as the life she had fought so hard to protect disintegrated. How could he do this? How could he lie to her for so long, in so many ways? The investigator's voice broke through her haze. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone filled with the kind of sympathy that came from having delivered bad news too many times before. "If you need anything else, just let me know." Sarah nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She gathered the photos and the financial documents, feeling the sharp edges of reality cutting into her skin as she left the office. By the time she reached her car, her body gave way to the emotions she had been holding back. Sobs racked her frame as she clutched the steering wheel, the pain of Adam's deceit too much to contain. She had suspected something for months, but seeing it all laid out so clearly, the photos, the financial betrayal, it was a different kind of heartbreak. One that felt final, like the shattering of something she could never put back together. Hours passed before Sarah was able to calm herself enough to think clearly. The shock was beginning to fade, replaced by a cold, focused clarity. Adam had betrayed her on every level. There was no saving this marriage. There was no trust left to rebuild, no foundation to stand on. He had used her, lied to her, and broken their vows in more ways than she could have ever imagined. With trembling hands, Sarah made another call. This time, it was to a lawyer. The conversation was brief and businesslike, as if the woman on the other end of the line had heard this story 100 times before. But for Sarah, it felt like she was making the most difficult decision of her life. She met with the lawyer the next day, her emotions still raw but her mind resolute. As they discussed the details of the divorce proceedings, Sarah felt an unexpected sense of relief. The pain hadn't gone away, but knowing that she was taking action, that she was regaining control of her life, gave her a small glimmer of hope. She didn't need to tolerate Adam's lies any longer. She didn't need to accept his betrayal as part of her reality. As the paperwork was laid out before her, Sarah signed the first document, her pen shaking slightly but her heart firm. This was the beginning of the end, but also the start of something new, a life where she no longer had to doubt, no longer had to wonder when the next betrayal would come. A life where she could begin to heal. When she left the lawyer's office, the weight of the last few months hung heavy on her shoulders, but for the first time in a long time, she also felt a sense of freedom. She would no longer be tied to Adam's lies. She would no longer be bound by a love that had turned into something unrecognizable. As she drove away, Sarah glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her, stronger, sharper, ready to reclaim her life. The evening air was crisp as Sarah walked toward the restaurant where she and Adam had celebrated their wedding anniversary years ago. She had chosen this place intentionally, a location that had once been the backdrop for their happiest moments. But now, it would be the setting for their final conversation, a farewell to a life they could no longer share. As she entered the restaurant, the familiar atmosphere washed over her, bringing with it a flood of memories. She remembered how they had laughed over candlelight, how Adam had held her hand across the table, making promises for a future they had both believed in. It was hard to reconcile those moments with the cold, bitter truth she now held in her heart. Sarah spotted Adam already seated at a corner table, his posture tense as he stared at his phone. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. She sat down across from him, her movements measured and deliberate. There was no nervousness, no trembling. She had made her decision, and tonight she would see it through. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was filled with the unspoken weight of all they had lost. Sarah took a deep breath and began, her voice calm and unwavering. "Adam, I know everything," she said, her eyes meeting his. "I know about Lydia, and I know about the money." Adam's face paled slightly, his eyes widening in surprise. He opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah raised a hand, signaling for him to wait. "I've already hired a private investigator," she continued, her tone steady. "I've seen the photos, and I have the bank records. You've been taking money from our accounts to support Lydia's business without telling me. It's not just an affair, Adam, it's financial betrayal. You've been lying to me in more ways than I can count." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Sarah watched as Adam's expression shifted, shock flickering across his face before being replaced by guilt and a feeble attempt at justification. "I was lost, Sarah," Adam began, his voice low, almost pleading. "I didn't know what to do. I've been feeling trapped for so long, and Lydia, she was just an escape. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." Sarah felt a flicker of something, anger, sadness, maybe even pity, but it quickly passed. She remained silent, letting him continue. "You know our history, Sarah," Adam went on, his eyes searching hers. "We've been through so much together. I don't want to throw it all away. I still care about you." He tried to remind her of the life they had built, the memories, the shared dreams, the plans for the future. He spoke of the house they had made into a home, the laughter they once shared, the milestones they had celebrated as a couple. But for Sarah, it was like listening to a story from someone else's life, a life that no longer felt like her own. She had loved Adam deeply once, but that love had been chipped away piece by piece until all that was left was a hollow shell of what they used to be. The betrayal had severed the bond they had, leaving only the cold reality of his deceit. When Adam finished speaking, there was a long pause. Sarah took a breath, her eyes calm but resolute. "This is the end, Adam," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I've already filed for divorce. We can't fix this. What we had, it's gone. You destroyed it with your lies." Adam looked at her, stunned. "Sarah, please, we can work this out. We can go back to therapy, we can try again." "No," she interrupted, shaking her head gently. "We can't go back. And even if we could, I don't want to. We both deserve a new beginning, but not together." She stood up slowly, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a final verdict. Adam sat frozen, his mouth half open as if he wanted to say something more, but no words came. Sarah looked at him one last time. She felt no rage, no bitterness. What she felt was clarity, a sense of finality that she hadn't known she needed until this moment. The sorrow that had clung to her for so long began to lift, replaced by something stronger, something more resolute. She realized that while this was the end of one chapter, it was also the start of something new, something she could build for herself. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the restaurant, the cool night air greeting her as she stepped onto the street. Her heart was still heavy, but there was a lightness to her steps, as if with each stride, she was shedding the burdens of the past. As she walked away from the place that had once symbolized their love, Sarah felt a sense of peace begin to settle within her. The pain of betrayal would take time to heal, but she knew she had made the right choice. She had taken back her power, her voice, her future. Adam was no longer a part of her story. But she still had her own to write. After the divorce, Sarah stood at the edge of her new life, both uncertain and relieved. The weight of the past had finally lifted, though the road ahead was still uncharted. For the first time in what felt like forever, she had the freedom to shape her own future. And that's exactly what she intended to do. One of her oldest dreams had always been to open a cafe, a place where people could gather, relax, and find a little piece of joy in their day. With her love of art and passion for creating cozy spaces, Sarah knew this was her chance to bring that dream to life. It wasn't just about starting a business, it was about reclaiming her sense of purpose and building something of her own. She threw herself into the project, finding a quaint little spot in the heart of town. The building was charming, with exposed brick walls and large windows that invited the sunlight in. Sarah's artistic side came alive as she designed every inch of the cafe. She hand-picked furniture that exuded warmth and comfort, and each table had a unique character, much like the customers she hoped to attract. Her paintings, vibrant and full of life, hung on the walls, lending the space a personal touch. It wasn't just a cafe, it was a reflection of her heart, a place where she could be herself, free from the shadows of her past. Word spread quickly. Locals and tourists alike were drawn to the cozy, inviting atmosphere Sarah had created. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air, and laughter and conversation soon echoed through the space. The cafe became a haven for artists, writers, and friends gathering to share their lives. It wasn't long before Sarah started forming deep connections with the people who frequented her cafe, something she hadn't expected but welcomed with an open heart. Each day brought with it a new sense of purpose. Sarah found herself waking up excited to go to work, to create, and to connect with others. With every cup of coffee she served and every smile she received in return, her confidence grew. Slowly but surely, she began to see that she didn't need Adam to feel whole. The life she was building now was one entirely of her own making. One evening, after a particularly busy day, Sarah closed the cafe and stood at the doorway, looking out at the empty street bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. The exhaustion she felt was a satisfying kind, the kind that came from pouring her heart into something meaningful. It hit her then, with the quiet night as her witness, she had done it. She had created a life on her own terms, one filled with creativity, connection, and joy. Adam had tried reaching out a few times after the divorce, leaving her messages that went unanswered. She wasn't angry anymore, but she also wasn't interested in reopening that door. Their chapter had closed, and she was firm in her decision to leave it behind. Eventually, Sarah learned from mutual acquaintances that Lydia had left Adam as well. After discovering his lies about their finances, Lydia had walked away, leaving Adam to deal with the fallout of his own choices. But by then, Sarah was no longer concerned with Adam or his fate. Her life had moved on, and so had she. Her days became filled with simple joys, the satisfaction of watching her cafe thrive, the warmth of new friendships, and the quiet moments of peace she had found in her solitude. She smiled more often now, truly smiled, and it wasn't because of anyone else's validation. It was because she had built something beautiful, something real, out of the ashes of her old life. One evening, after locking up the cafe, her phone buzzed with a message from one of her friends. They were having a picnic by the lake and wanted her to join. Sarah hesitated for a moment, thinking of all the times she would have declined in the past, feeling too weighed down by her grief to enjoy such things. But this time, her heart leaped at the idea. She texted back a quick, "I'll be there," and smiled to herself as she imagined the laughter and light-hearted conversation that awaited her. As Sarah drove to the lake, the setting sun cast a golden hue over the horizon, reflecting on the calm waters. Her friends had already gathered, and the sound of their voices drifted through the air as she approached. They greeted her warmly, spreading out blankets, unpacking food, and pouring wine. The moment was perfect in its simplicity, just friends enjoying life, free from the complications of the past. As the evening wore on, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: excitement about the future. She looked up at the sky, the stars just beginning to peek through, and realized that the heaviness she had carried for so long had finally lifted. The pain, the betrayal, the bitterness, it was all behind her now. In its place was peace, and with that peace came a deep belief in her own strength. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had led her to this moment, a moment of true freedom. Sarah knew there would still be challenges ahead, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had built a life that was hers alone, and she was ready for whatever came next. There were new adventures waiting for her, and she would embrace them with open arms. As the breeze whispered through the trees and the soft hum of conversation surrounded her, Sarah smiled, knowing that her journey was far from over. In fact, it had just begun.